Now I know a lot of y'all saw this video and you got upset. You got heated. You mad right now. You in the comment section below telling me I don't know nothing about boxing. What do I know? I'm just a young little kid. I don't know nothing about this sport. I ain't been around long enough. I got Similac on my breath. I'm wet behind the ears, so on and so forth. And I'm here to tell you all that, listen, you are entitled to your opinion. You can get mad all you want to. I'm going to say how I feel on this channel, and it is what it is. The fact of the matter is that I grew up around some astute boxing minds, right? My uncles know this sport in and out. They live and breathe this sport. They've been loving it since they were kids, right? I was watching boxing matches with them since I was a little boy on the couch next to them. I've studied fights. I looked at fighters' records. I've been looking at certain older fights. I can tell you certain things about fighters. I can look and see certain skill sets. I can see certain holes in fighters' games, so on and so forth. And I'm here to tell you all that Mike Tyson is probably one of the most overrated heavyweight champions of the last 30 years. People don't like to say it. They don't like to hear it. They don't like for people to say it because Mike Tyson was a dynamo. He was a knockout artist, a supreme knockout artist. He was exciting. The aura around him was godlike in a boxing ring. We had never seen an enigma. We've never seen a figure like Mike Tyson to come through and just be such a brute at such a young age. But it is what it is. And the fact is that every time Mike Tyson stepped up in competition, he lost. He lost to Buster Douglas, he lost twice to Evander Holyfield, and he lost to Lennox Lewis as well. Then he went on to lose some fights at the end of his career, for sure. But, you know, we got to be honest. When people talk about Mike Tyson, especially the Mike Tyson fanatics, they deal in ifs and would-haves. If Cus D'Amato wouldn't have died. If Mike Tyson would have stayed away from Robin Givens. If Mike Tyson would have stayed away from drugs and liquor. If Mike Tyson would have stayed out of jail. Well, brother, if was a fifth, we all be drunk. Okay? All we could deal with is reality and what actually happened and what didn't happen. And the fact of the matter is that when Mike Tyson stepped up, he lost. So all this, because he was on drugs. Well, brother, whose fault is that? That's Mike Tyson's fault if he on drugs and liquor and he worried about just having sex with women instead of focusing on his fight game. That you can't penalize his opponent and try to downplay his opponent. That win that Holyfield and them got, that don't count because they would have never beaten Mike prison term. Pre-Mike Tyson prison term, he was unstoppable. He was unbeatable. Nobody wanted to fight him. He would have did this. He would have did that. Well, brother, all this he woulda, coulda, shoulda, he didn't. Okay? All this, and especially they use it to discredit Evander Holyfield's wins, especially. And I feel like that's a whole bunch of BS because Evander was even older than Mike when he whooped on Mike's head, right? And then Mike was coming out of jail, so he had a whole lot of in-ring rust. Well, he damn sure that ring rust didn't matter when he won 2 belts. He was a champion, a heavyweight champion after he came out of jail. He had 2 belts at that point when he fought Evander Holyfield. Oh, y'all wasn't talking about ring rust then. You wasn't talking about how the ring rust played a part. The ring rust only played a part, he was in jail. The part about him being in jail only mattered when he fought an elite fighter like Evander Holyfield. When Holyfield went up in there and put a beating on his head. Now, it's Holyfield only won because Mike was in jail all them years. But you didn't say nothing about, Mike show looked good against some other opponents when he won them belts, right? You didn't talk about jail then, but when he fought Evander Holyfield, Evander only won because he was in jail. Man, cut it out. And Evander had came back from heart problems years prior too, where he had to sit out from the sport. And he came back from that and still still whooped on Mike's head, right? And I know a lot of people gonna say, well, Evander was using steroids. And do I believe that Evander Holyfield was a steroid user? Absolutely, right? But do I believe that everybody else in boxing was using steroids? Absolutely, including Mike Tyson. Mike always been big, this, that, and the third. Man, Mike was on that stuff too. He was using performance enhancing drugs too, just like majority of them fighters was, because it wasn't even no blood testing back then. It wasn't no blood testing. All of them was doing it. They was all on an equal playing field. So cut all that out. Evander was on steroid. Nah, Mike Tyson was on some stuff too. As much as I love Mike Tyson. I don't want this to be a Mike Tyson hate video because, of course, he was exciting to watch. You couldn't help but keep your eyes glued to the screen when Mike Tyson was on the screen. But I'm here to talk, and we're going to talk about truths, right? And the fact of the matter is, every time he went up against elite competition, Mike Tyson got folded like a lawn chair at the Labor Day barbecue. And if I'm lying, I'm flying. And as y'all can see, my feet are firmly cemented to this ground, so you know I ain't lying, right? Mike wasn't even the best heavyweight champion of his era. Evander Holyfield was a better heavyweight champion than Mike Tyson was. Evander beat better opposition to me. You know what I'm saying? Evander fought everybody. You know, and to me, he was more accomplished. Now, Mike had more knockouts. Mike was the youngest heavyweight champion of ever in boxing history, which is a great feat. He was knocking dudes out left and right, and his highlights are more entertaining than Evander Holyfield's. But I feel like Evander's reigns and his stuff was more respectable to me. Evander was what? Evander really should have been what? He was what? 4-time heavyweight champion? How many times Evander won that belt? 3 or 4 times? And he should have been even more because they gonna make him lose against Nikolai Valuev. He was 46 years old. He really should have won a heavyweight title, the WBA heavyweight title then. That's how good Evander Holyfield was as a fighter and how trained and how sharp his mind was on the sport of boxing, right? But all this if was a fifth and all these would-ofs and could-ofs and should-ofs with Mike, no, man. We got to talk about what really happened, right? And people will tell you, they will say that Mike was extremely talented and that he was destroying everyone in his sight. That's what people will tell you. Mike was destroying everyone. He was extremely talented and he was destroying everybody. But my question is, who was he destroying? He's destroying everybody like who? Who exactly is Mike Tyson destroying? The problem with Mike Tyson fanatics is they give him much more credit than he deserves based upon highlights and not the actual fights. A lot of Mike Tyson's biggest fans did not watch Mike's fights for real. They watch highlights, they watch stuff on SportsCenter and all that, and they conjured in their mind that Mike Tyson is the greatest they've ever seen because they see him drop dudes left and right, left and right, left and right. But them same individuals will see Deontay Wilder drop dudes and say Deontay Wilder ain't shit and he ain't nothing and he ain't gonna never be nothing, right? So, you know, it's yeah. And this is the thing too. Again, a lot of Mike Tyson fanatics don't watch the fights, so they don't pay attention to the competition that Mike was actually facing. They make assumptions based upon highlights and figure that he could have beaten anyone just like that because of how he beat this tomato can or how he beat this guy that wasn't really that good, right? Most people will sit here and tell you, because I'm gonna put this in perspective. Most people will tell you that Mike Tyson's prime years were from 1986 to 1988. But none of the dudes that he beat in that time frame were great heavyweights. From 86 to 88, none of them were great heavyweights. None of them were elite heavyweights in his prime years. The most elite champion that he beat during that time was 38-year-old Larry Holmes, who had been retired for 2 years at that point, and they pulled him out of retirement only because Don King handed him a large lump sum of money that he couldn't turn down. Larry Holmes, his heart wasn't in boxing no more, and Larry was an elite champion. He had one of the best jabs I've ever seen in boxing, period. Larry Holmes' jab was phenomenal, right? Excellent. But when Mike Tyson beat Larry Holmes, that was an old shell. Larry was a shell of himself. He was retired for 2 years. He wasn't thinking about boxing until they came and brought that bread to him. That was not the same Larry Holmes that was beating up on every single body and dominating the heavyweight division. And Mike Tyson know that himself, right? Mike Tyson's best wins to me were against Trevor Berbick. And then that's when he beat Trevor, that's when he became the youngest heavyweight champion at 20 years old, right? Another good win was Razor Ruddock. Other best win was Frank Bruno, Michael Spinks. And Michael Spinks, they could talk about the Michael Spinks win all they want to. Michael Spinks was coming off a run as a light heavyweight champion when he fought Mike Tyson. He was the light heavyweight champion, then he moved up. He wasn't an undefeated fighter at heavyweight. He wasn't used to being no heavyweight when he fought Mike. That was not the weight class that he fought at. He had a reign at light heavyweight. Then came his brother was the heavyweight dude, was the goon at the heavyweight weight class. So when he fought Mike, he wasn't no legit heavyweight for real, you know. And again, those wins I named, Razor Ruddock, Frank Bruno, Michael Spinks, those were good wins, but they weren't great wins. They were not great wins for Mike, man. He never beat an elite guy. Mike never beat an elite fighter. And again, 38-year-old, 37-year-old Larry Holmes don't count at all. None of them guys I mentioned in them names outside of Larry Holmes, Razor Ruddock, who else I said? I said Razor Ruddock, Trevor Berbick, Frank Bruno, Michael Spinks. Them dudes, none of them are historically great fighters. None of them are, right? They good wins, they not great wins. None of them are historically significant wins for Mike Tyson at all. Mike defeated a lot of B-level guys and below. When he went up against A-level competition, he got beat up. And it's a reason for that, man. Again, Mike had this aura, like godlike aura around him. People were enamored with his power. Mike was supremely skilled as a fighter, but he was a bully. He used bully tactics to gain an advantage over an opponent. And that's why he was able to be beat like he was. The best way to defeat a bully is to attack them mentally. Bullies are used to having physical advantages and intimidation on their side. Mike Tyson was a guy who thrived off intimidation. Mike knew he had guys beat when they did the stare down in the middle of the ring before the fight. He can tell, he can smell fear on them dudes. They were scared of him. They were so afraid that even when Mike grazed them sometimes, they probably would drop because they were scared. And again, it's not to say Mike had true, devastating knockout power without question. Some of the best uppercuts I've ever seen in my life. For real. The hook shots and the uppercuts were phenomenal, right? But he used a lot of intimidation tactics to get in guys' head, and they were already defeated from the jump, right? But once that intimidation and the physical advantages do not work, once that doesn't work, they don't have anything else to turn to get the outcome they want. They don't have anything else to turn. When a bully when the physical advantages don't work, when intimidation don't work, they don't have nothing else to turn to. Nothing else in their reservoir to turn to keep them in the fight, to keep them at a point where they can win the fight at all. And the same goes for Mike Tyson. Once he went up against Evander Holyfield, and it was clear that Evander Holyfield was not going to be bullied. It was clear that Evander Holyfield was not going to just lay down for him because he came out trying to get Evander up out of there from the moment the bell rang. Y'all remember that fight? He came out ferocious, trying to hurry up and whoop Evander's ass. And Evander stood firm, stood tall, and was in his shit, all up in his grill, fighting him back. Mike knew he was in for a war. And he was like, oh my God, this dude is not afraid of me. When you showed Mike Tyson you were not scared of him, oh man, like he didn't know how to take that because he was so used to playing off bullying and intimidation. I'm not saying he was going around taking dudes lunch money. When I say bullying, I mean he was used to just using physical prowess and intimidation tactics to just beat guys. And when that didn't work, it was over with, man. Like, again, I don't give a damn what nobody say. When Mike Tyson beat Evander Holyfield's ear is because he wanted a way out of that fight because he knew he could not beat Evander. I don't give a damn what nobody say. They're going to tell you always because Evander was headbutting him. So I would have bit him too. You would have bit him, brother. You would have lost all that money. You would have lost that damn money. You would have did something stupid like that. You would have disqualified yourself by doing something stupid because you getting headbutted. You would have did that too. Cut it out, brother. Y'all just Tyson fanatics. Y'all don't know how to separate when a brother did some silly, foolish nonsense versus him. You know what I'm saying? Y'all don't know how to separate this. Y'all don't know how to separate that and say, you know what? He was wrong. That's not something he should have done. Y'all oftentimes make excuses for every single thing Mike did. Mike bit that man because he knew he couldn't beat him and he wanted a way out. I don't care what nobody say, man. You know? And same with in the Buster Douglas fight. Now, when Buster wasn't afraid of him, Mike was in trouble. And again, Buster was fighting off fumes from his mother dying. I think he went through a divorce at that time. His wife left him. He had a lot inside of him. He's the underdog. People were saying he really wasn't that good of a heavyweight. He was a letdown in his community. I think Buster from Ohio or something like that, right? He wasn't living up to certain expectations and so on and so forth. They're like, oh, you lazy. You could be in better shape. He had all them fumes in him that helped to get him to that next level to whoop on Mike Tyson's head. And when Mike saw that Buster wasn't afraid of him, Mike was in trouble, man. Again, this is not a video to shit on Mike Tyson and act like he ain't nothing or whatever, because Mike Tyson is a great fighter. He was a great fighter, but he's still one of the most overrated champions in the last 30 years, y'all. I'm not lying. There's a lot of times Mike every time Lennox whooped on his head, Evander whooped on his head twice. And it was clear. So yeah, man, it's a lot. Mike is a great fighter, but he's not what people make him out to be. Like he was just this unbeatable. Nobody would have beat him. Nobody wanted a piece of him. When I can show y'all, Evander Holyfield was calling for the Mike Tyson fight, before Mike even got in trouble and went to jail. Evander wanted some of that action before Mike went to jail. He wanted to fight Mike Tyson. And I can argue that Evander was going to always be Mike. He just had Mike's number. That's going back to their days when they were amateurs. And Mike saw Evander in the gym. And Evander was whooping on everybody. Evander was just a better fighter than Mike. He had his number, and he was always going to do that to Mike. Even in Mike's prime years. Especially in 1990-91, Evander was going to get on his head the same way. Regardless of what people want to tell you, man. It was going to be what it was going to be, man. And people overrate Mike because of his highlights. And they see him knocking out all these dudes and feel like, oh, he could have knocked out any and everybody because he knocked out this tomato can and that one. You know, and people don't like to say it. They talk about Deontay Wilder, other dudes and all this and all of that. Yeah, I know Mike Tyson fought a lot more. He did. He fought more elite competition than Deontay did. Mike, in Mike's era, guys were much more skilled than today's guys. I can definitely agree to that. But Mike knocked out a whole lot of tomato cans too. For real. I can argue Mike wasn't going to beat up on Riddick Bowe either. For real. I can argue that too. Riddick Bowe was going to beat up on Mike too. You know, but it is what it is, man. But Mike Tyson is one of the most overrated heavyweight champions in the last 30 years. It ain't Deontay Wilder because nobody looks at Deontay Wilder. A lot of people criticize him every single hour, every single hour of the day. Because they know he doesn't have the pugilistic abilities that other champions have had. Nobody looks at Deontay as an all-time great. They look at Mike Tyson as the greatest boxer, the greatest heavyweight to ever live. And I'm like, he wasn't even the greatest champion in his era. It was Evander Holyfield, and Lennox was. But hell, what the hell do I know? Machiavelli Mills TV, I'm out. Peace.